Happy Friday, everyone. Good news is we've got to our first Friday, got 14 more to go after this one. But this is a little bit less exciting of a Friday than the other Fridays because we don't get to start with a quiz and don't get to do our normal technology projects. But don't worry, we got something coming up for that next week. We're going to actually be doing our first discussion today. And so we'll have that led by the group leaders, and we'll talk a little bit about IT governance, which is an interesting topic. I say interesting, maybe that's a little bit too much of a sell. I mean, the first few weeks of this course are definitely pretty tedious. I think they're important. These are topics that are going to be very, very relevant to what you're going to be doing in the real world, regardless of what direction you go. But getting through them is kind of a slog. You got to see now why I break you up into groups and kind of separate out the responsibilities. If I said, all right, do this for homework, everybody would be like, this is the most miserable experience I've ever had in my life. So I try to minimize misery and maximize excitement to the constraint that I still have to teach you the material in the course. So before we get started today, let's go ahead and remind you of what we talked about on Wednesday. So Wednesday, I made a couple of announcements. First of all, graduate student survey. So most of you have completed it. Not everyone. Most of you have completed it. For those of you who have not completed it, please go into the link on Brightspace, fill that out. Again, the information is strictly confidential. It's mostly for helping us see what's happening with our students. Also, if you do not currently have a position, we may be able to be in a situation where we can help you find a position. So that's one good reason to do that. I'm going to say that at least one person who promised me that they would fill it out immediately after class has not completed it. I'm not going to mention any names, okay? But everybody's looking around to see who it is. So I'm not going to give it away. I'm not going to out that person. Yeah. So please make sure everybody fills it out. All right. Also, graduate student council student representative application. If you're interested in doing that, please let me know. Please fill that out. We do have some applications from the accounting program, so you're not the only one if you haven't filled it out, or if you have filled it out. But I would like to have some interest in there. Remember that just by filling out the application, regardless of whether you're accepted or not, you do get a 15 out of 15 on one of the quizzes in this course. That being said, if you do get accepted as the applicant, then you will be responsible for attending the meetings. A whole 1 hour and 20-minute meetings a month. I mean, I know it's a lot to ask you guys are busy, but and for those of your GTRAs, you may be looking for that time. So something to consider is that can account to GTRA time. All right. Today, we're going to start out with IT governance, which I think is a good beginning to jump out with. So we're going to be doing our introduction to IT governance. Now, I want to clarify and preface this by saying that what we're going to be talking about over the next few weeks specifically, and over the course of the semester generally, is going to be governance. We're going to have a lot of discussion in this area. It's not one of these one-shot things that's like, okay, thank God that's done. In fact, in the next week, we're going to be talking about IT frameworks, which we alluded to here. It's really important, but it's critical, but it is a bit dry. So this is something that I think we just need to kind of jump into running and figure out what's going on. And I want to start this discussion. I want to start with the definition of IT governance. Now, my assumption is that you probably have some passing familiarity with this already. At least I would assume so, because I had every single one of you in accounting information systems. And we did talk about IT governance to some degree or another in that course. However, as far as the actual definition goes, I didn't sit you down and say, let's talk about IT governance, and I want to make you define this in detail and make sure you have a detailed understanding of what this concept means. We just kind of talked about the governance frameworks and what it means at a very general level. So the very first thing we need to do to start out in this course is get a working definition. And the good news is we have several definitions. That being said, they're not necessarily what you would anticipate. So let's just go ahead and I'm going to read the first definition, and then I want to discuss it because it's going to reveal something that we probably already knew, but we probably didn't think about. So very first definition, this is what I pulled from the CIO wiki. It says IT governance, or information technology governance, is a process used to monitor and control key information technology capability decisions in an attempt to ensure the delivery of value to key stakeholders in an organization. Now, it starts out defined, says, okay, IT governance, monitor and control. Those are terms we're familiar with. Technology capability decisions. So basically, we're trying to make sure that our IT does what we say it's going to do. What purpose does it serve? This is the critical point that I want to point out, okay? What is the purpose? It says to did most people come up with this definition that I'm looking at right here? Did you see something similar to this? Okay, so something similar, if not that exact word or definition verbatim. All right, to ensure the delivery of value to key stakeholders in an organization. All right. So what is the most important word in that blurb that I just said? To ensure the delivery of value to key stakeholders in the organization. Give you a hint, begins the letter V. Value, okay. Is that the term that you would associate with IT governance if I were just to ask you this before fact? If I were to say define IT governance and not give you a template for defining it, was that the word that you would use? Say one word associated with IT governance. I mean, we're accountants, and more specifically, I'm an auditor, okay? And auditors tend to be more focused on another conceptual word, which is really important and really important. It's the name of a board game. It's 4 letters long, begins with the letter R. Does everybody know the word I'm talking about? Risk, okay? So when we think about governance, I think our natural starting point is going to be risk. Is the word risk anywhere in this definition? It's not. And that really surprised me when I first started doing this research. Okay, now this template comes from several years ago when I first started to do the research, but I say the same thing every single year. It's like I was looking for something that was going to be talking about mitigation of risk and heightening of security. And I will say we're going to find out that is relevant to IT governance. Okay, that is a relevant concern in IT governance. But the definition at a very basic level, at a very broad level, says we want to make sure our IT, their information technology, provides a value to the organization. Now, that in and of itself is it surprised me, but it should not really be all that surprising. And I think that has to do with the kind of the structure that we have in our classes and our courses in the undergraduate level, is that you originally learn about accounting and you say accounting is the language of business and what's the whole goal is to provide value to stakeholders. And if you started out in accounting and I say, what's IT governance? How does it relate to accounting? It says, oh, well, this is probably information technology for the purpose of accounting, and accounting is to provide value. We don't really start getting focused on the risk until we get to junior and senior levels. And then we say accounting is about risk management. All right. Accounting at a basic level is not about risk management. It's about delivery of value to stakeholders. And that's what this is saying. It's saying, how do we integrate information technology into this capacity? So this was kind of one of those things that had made me take a step back and says, yeah, I'm really too focused on risk, which, again, makes sense given the courses that I teach. I'm going to be very focused on this idea of security, but IT governance itself is not a security mechanism solely. Okay, it is a security mechanism, but it's not solely a security mechanism. It's about value in an organization. And how do we derive that value? Now, there's a few different ways to take perspective on this. Now, the first one is just the value generation of organization. How many organizations exist out there for purposes other than creating value? I would argue 0 of those. Okay, there may be some side argument say, well, what about tax shelters, Dr. Barnes? And you say, all right, well, they don't generate obvious value, but they do generate value because they are providing some sort of tax benefit to the organization. So a sideways value, okay? You may say not-for-profits don't provide value, but I'd argue that they don't provide tangible value in terms of profit, but they do provide value in the services they provide. So value delivery is the core goal of most organizations. In fact, I'd say all organizations. There's maybe some organizations out there that don't accomplish that goal, okay? Or there may be 1 or 2 organizations you may say they may just kind of be what's the word I'm looking for? They may be shams. They're set up for the express goal of presenting value, but they basically don't. It's like an Enron scheme. It's like the mark-to-market accounting where they say, all right, we're going to recognize all the profits up front, but we'll never actually see those profits realized. That might be an argument for no value being generated, but that's exception, the distant exception rather than the rule. Okay, so again, spend 3 or 4 minutes just talking about this concept of value. I want to hammer that home. Okay, all of our decisions, the very basic, our basic crux needs to be that what we're providing from IT delivery perspective needs to generate value. There's also another perspective for this. Does everybody remember the slide that we did back in AIS? And I know that I'm going way, way back. It was the beginning of AIS, okay? So some of you may be like 2 years ago, okay? But the beginning of AIS, I showed you Statement on Financial Accounting Concepts number 8, which you may have encountered in other courses. Statement on Financial Accounting Concept number 8. It was a big slide, and it talked about the nature of accounting information. If you don't worry about this, I'm not going to quiz you on this, but I do want to reiterate something that we talked about in that course. And I do know that everybody in this course talked about that because you all took this recently enough that I did talk about it in that course. So I had this slide and I showed you this map of how accounting information should be construed. And some of it dealt with fundamental characteristics of accounting information, relevance and faithful representation. Some talked about the characteristics of that information and what it represents. But one of the things that was talked about is talked about a pervasive constraint of accounting information. All right, this one should spark a memory. You should have a little bit of a recognition. Say, no, that does ring a bell. If it's not ringing a bell, your bells are set up wrong. Okay, so if it's not ringing a bell, let's just talk about this. So one of the things, the pervasive constraint, as I said, the pervasive constraint of accounting information is cost. More specifically, the pervasive constraint is the cost of providing accounting information can never exceed the benefit of providing that information. And that is a recurring theme that we're going to see throughout this course, is the idea that we want to make sure that if we're providing services, accounting information or IT governance, both that's kind of synonymous in this regard, whatever we're going to be provide, we need to make sure that we achieve a benefit above and beyond the cost of providing that. And we're going to have an anecdotal example here in just a second from a YouTube video, but everybody's going to immediately going to see, all right, that was a bad decision. Okay, that was a bad decision for this cost benefit constraint. Now, I know I'm not saying anything profound. I think everybody in this room probably would say, well, Dr. Barnes, I'm a big advocate for cost versus benefit and making sure my costs don't exceed my benefits. Like you wouldn't be here if that was the case. You, at least to some degree, you believe that the benefit of achieving a master's degree is going to outweigh the cost of that degree. Okay, because probably going to go on to get some sort of licensure, get a job, have a successful career, and come back and give lots of money to Truman State. Okay, that's the goal right there. At least that's my goal right there. Okay, your goal maybe not so much. Okay, and you say be hypocritical. Say, Dr. Barnes, I will give as much money to Truman State as you've given to your alma mater, and to that I'll say, touche. All right, all right. I have given some, just not very much. So yeah, that's actually been recorded. It's going on YouTube right now. All right, let's go on with the definitions. Go on the definitions. The objective of IT governance is to ensure the delivery of business results, not IT systems performance, nor IT risk management. So it actually talks about risk management there. It specifically says, look, IT governance is a much broader concept than these little things that we're going to be talking about. Now, are there going to be standards? Are there going to be frameworks for talking about these items? Absolutely. But at a very broad level, at the highest level that we're going to be concerned about, this is about value delivery. So it's not going to be just focused on these little incidental items. So that would reinforce the notion of IT of in and of itself. To the contrary, and I've got this italicized underlined in my notes. This is probably an important statement. IT governance is about IT decisions that have an impact on business value. Now, you don't need to write that down verbatim because we've just talked about that. IT governance is about IT decisions that have an impact on business value. So basically, whatever decisions we make with respect to IT governance, they should be value generating. All right, so I think I've hammered that home. I beat the dead horse pretty consistently. It's probably not the last time we're going to talk about value, at least not even in this lecture. But I think that's going to be the concept we need to reinforce, is that we want to make sure that our value focus is first. Now, I do want to talk about there's going to be subject to constraints, okay? So that does mean, it does bring up to a question. I've got this question written down, and it's somewhat of a rhetorical question, but I want to get your feedback on it nonetheless, all right? So my question is, does this statement that was just said, IT governance decisions about have to have an impact on business value, does this mean that IT governance can have conflicting roles, particularly with respect to information security? What do you guys think? Can IT governance promote conflicting viewpoints, basically? Obviously, their answer has to be yes. I wouldn't ask the question otherwise. If the answer was no, I said, well, Dr. Barnes, why answer that question? I said, I just wanted something to talk about. I really miss talking to you guys. Okay, but yeah, the answer is yes. Conflicting roles. Now, how do we validate that? All right, the validation comes with this idea that value is not always consistent with the idea of risk. That we could have value generating activities that we don't partake in simply because of the risk involved. Something that's very, very obvious is to think about investing right now. Okay, think about investing right now, or just investing in general. Some stocks you would say are going to be a safe investment, like stocks that have been in place forever, or even crypto assets, whatever it is you want to invest in. You can invest in those and think, all right, this is going to generate value, maybe a minimal amount of value, but it will generate value. Or you could invest in something that's going to be a meme right now. You know, like you could invest in a meme crypto coin, or you could invest in a stock that's been going up and down like this, and you could generate higher levels of value. But most people don't do that. Why not? The risky, yeah, it's risky. So basically, the idea that risk and value can be contradictory to one another is paramount. Now, this is one of my favorite stories to tell. You're going to have to bear with me because if I've told it before, I apologize. Again, my disclaimer: I will tell stories in this class, and some of these stories you will have heard before. Okay, I don't want you to say, okay. Just want you to nod and say, "That's a great story, Dr. Barnes." Okay, because most of my stories are worth repeating anyway. But this one actually goes back to 2021. I was invited to a conference in Las Vegas, which Las Vegas is one of my favorite places to go for obvious reasons. Saturday of the conference, instead of sitting around and listening to accounting presentation, I said, I'm going gambling. Okay. So I went to one of the casinos and I sat down and I played Texas Hold'em for about an hour. And I used to play Texas Hold'em a lot. Okay. I used to play Texas Hold'em a lot back in the PhD program because we had these massive stacks of papers we had to read, and I could not just sit there in a quiet room or at a desk in the library and just like, this is a highlighter, by the way. I would go to the casinos on the weekends and I would spend like 6, 7 hours playing Texas Hold'em. And while I'm doing that, waiting for a hand to come up, I would actually highlight notes. Am I encouraging you to do that? Absolutely not. Okay. Absolutely not. That was just a routine I found that worked for me. It was very effective. Okay. And it was value maximizing for me because I actually made money in the process because I was a pretty good Texas Hold'em player. Actually, I was a bad Texas Hold'em player, but the people I was playing against were much worse. Okay. So that was kind of the activity that I did. So I was playing Texas Hold'em at the casino, and I won $100. I was up $100, and so my brother has this inane philosophy that whenever you play roulette, you should always bet on 28 black because he did it one time and won. All right, and so I had done that like about 10 times before I'd gone to Las Vegas because I went to Las Vegas pretty regularly, about 2 times a year back when I was in working for KPMG, and then also when I was in college for my PhD program. So I had done that quite a bit. I'd always bet 20 on 28 black. I never won. And so I'm walking out of the casino. I see the roulette table. I says, you know what? I'm up $100. What can hurt? What can it hurt just betting $20? Now, this is not a value maximizing philosophy. I don't want anybody to take it as such. But you can guess what's going to happen is I went, bet $20, put the chip down, and hit 28 black. And I was suddenly up $720 from that. Okay. So $700 net profit. Now, did that achieve value? Absolutely. Okay. Is this risk optimized value that I achieved? Absolutely not. Okay. I still go back and say that was a stupid bet to make. Okay. I know that the expected value of that bet, the bet of what I should have made on that particular one, was a negative amount. Okay. Because I'm going to hit roughly one in every, I think the odds are 37 times, and they give you 36 to 1 odds. So you can think about it. If you're going to hit that one in every 37 tries, we get 36 to 1 odds. Most of the time, you're going to be down. Okay, that's how casinos get you. The house always wins. Okay, that's what they tell you. So that's kind of the idea, is that I can achieve massive amounts of value if I win, but in the long run, that's not going to be the case. In the long run, I'm going to be out because that's not risk optimized value. So our goal here now is not necessarily to achieve value, but value with a constraint. And our constraint is risk optimization. We need to know what the risk level is, and we need to actually plan for that. So we do have to consider risk as part of value. So even though I said that risk was not important, it turns out, yes, it's very important. It's very relevant because it's going to be a component of our decision for making value. So last definition. The objective of IT governance is not just the delivery of risk optimized business value. Okay, so there's our statement. Okay, risk optimized business value, but also to engender the trust of key stakeholders in the people they've entrusted their money and livelihood to. So now we've got a third concept that's been imported into here. So we have value, then we ingrained the concept of risk with respect to value, and now we have trust. Now, can we make the argument that trust is a component of value? So think about it logically this way. Enron was one of the most successful companies on the planet until people lost their trust in it. What happened to Enron after people lost their trust in Enron? It disappeared, okay? It disappeared. Lost a ton of value. In fact, all of their value. Very minimal amount of their value was retained, okay? So trust is a very critical component of value, especially when value is generally derived by how people perceive the value of the organization. You know, the markets that we have, the capital markets that we have, stock market and things like that, that is an element of what people perceive the value is, not what the calculated value is. The amount of money that you have, the equity amount that you have on the books of a company, the amount that's on the statement of shareholders' equity or the balance sheet, that's different from what the amount is that's held in the markets, the market capitalization. And market capitalization is very, very focused on this idea of trust because that is a perception of people's value in the organization. How many people are going to invest in an organization they don't trust? It's like, I'm going to give them $1 million. I'm 100% positive they're going to steal all of my money, but it's still just $1 million. I mean, I know I'm saying just $1 million. I would love to have $1 million, but yeah, that nobody's going to invest any money. I could say $1 million, I could say $1,000, I could say $10. Most people in this room are not going to take that bet because it's just is one of those things if we don't trust, then we can't actually achieve value. So trust is going to be another component that we have to note. Also in notes here, it says engender the trust of key stakeholders. Okay, so usually when we talk about value of organization is generally derived by shareholders. Are shareholders and stakeholders the same thing? This is a really important question, by the way. Are they the same thing? So no, shareholders by definition are people who own the organization, who own the company, okay? Those are the stockholders. They own shares in the organization, hence the term shareholders. Stakeholders is anybody who has a stake in the organization. So that could be shareholders. So shareholders are stakeholders, but stakeholders are not necessarily shareholders. Who could be some other stakeholders? The employees of the organization, the customers, the vendors. Think about this logically. A stakeholder in the organization, it's like if we don't use that term stakeholder, if we just use it to shareholder, could we make decisions that could be value detrimental? So say for the organization, so we're talking to our vendors and say, we had a really, really rough year. So for the first quarter, we're just not going to be able to pay you. We're just not going to be able to pay those invoices we owe you. Okay. But that's okay because you're not a shareholder, you're just a vendor. How do you think the vendors are going to respond to that? They're gonna say, all right, we're no longer doing business with you and lawsuit. Okay. They're going to try to recover everything they owe. Yeah. So that's a bad value proposition. So we actually have to maximize for all stakeholders, not just our shareholders, which there's some examples of that organizations have not historically done a very good job of that in some contexts. Okay. We can't keep our definition just constrained to the immediate shareholders. We have to consider all stakeholders in that definition. So one can argue this trust results more in more business value, no doubt. But the fact remains is meant to be that to that end, it must be recognized independently as a motivation for IT governance. So this is an interesting context because I just defined trust in context of value, but can trust be an end of itself? I think that we can make an argument that I think trust is really important. Even if we think that it's value detrimental, we could say that trust is really, really critical. How could we actually say that trust could be value detrimental? Well, we could say, for example, something happens, a bad event happens, like a natural disaster, and it affects the people who are with the organization, say employees of the organization, like a factory has a collapse or it's hit by a hurricane or something like that. So all of a sudden, people in the organization are now out of a job. All right. The organization has to decide how to respond to this. They could shut down the factory and all those people now are unemployed, or they could rebuild the factory and they could pay the people while they're rebuilding it. Okay. Which is going to be the more value maximizing proposition? In the short term, definitely just letting it die. Okay. Collecting the insurance money and say, all right, best of luck to you. That's not going to engender a lot of trust. So we could make the argument that trust to some degree is value minimizing, at least in the short term. Do we generally think about trust in the absence of value? Generally not. Generally, we're going to think about trust in the context within value, but there are situations where trust is going to be separate from that, and we have to consider one or the other. It's just like the same thing with risk and value. Risk and value may be inconsistent with one another, so we have to consider them jointly. Same thing for trust and value. All right, moving on to the concept. Okay. Oh, so hold on. So in a sense, IT governance acts upon the old adage of trust but verify. So how does that translate for their purposes? So we do have this concept of trust and we want to hold it paramount, but is trust necessarily sufficient in and of itself? Is it going to be a means in and of itself? I say it's a good end, but is it a sufficient end all by itself? Can you have an organization that has a lot of trust but no value and no risk optimization? No. Can you have an organization that has no security? Like the whole idea behind trust but verify, that's an old statement. It's one of my favorites, trust but verify. It means that, okay, I want to believe what you're saying and I will continue to believe what you're saying, but I'm going to validate that everything that you're going to talk about. All right. So here's my first caveat for the semester. I'm going to refer back to classes that I've taught, and this is not for the purpose of trying to put you in any direction. This one's specifically going to refer back to auditing, okay? So those of you who are tax track, I'm not trying to impose auditing upon you. It's just that that's the course that I teach, okay? So if I ask you to refer back to auditing, it says, oh, he's teaching us auditing. No, it's just because it's a relevant concept from that particular course. So what do we know about evidence from auditing? So like observation inquiry, low reliability evidence, what did that usually require? Corroboration is testing. Corroboration, okay? We wanted to make sure we corroborate the information. Same holds true for information that where we only have trust, we need to have validation. We need to corroborate that information because even though we'd like to trust, we need support for that information. So trust is really important, but trust cannot exist in a vacuum is basically what we're trying to talk about here. Also, the IT Governance Institute, which is ACCT, defines IT governance as leadership, organizational structures, and processes to ensure the organization sustains and extends the organization's strategy and objectives. So that's a much more general definition, but I think we can encompass all of those three key concepts, value, security, or value, risk, and trust within the context of that definition. Also, did anybody second guess? Did anybody see ISACA when they were doing their reading, that the name of that organization? So we're going to encounter that organization again. They are the IT Governance Institute, and their acronym is ISACA, which makes no sense. Okay, we'll see a couple of examples like that. The reason why is because they actually used to be called something differently. I think it was Information Security and Controls Alliance or something like that. But they didn't change their acronym. They just changed the name of their organization. So IT Governance Institute, ISACA. If you're very curious about what that was, that's the reason why it used to be called something different. All right, moving on to question 2. Now I'm gonna start talking to you guys. All right. So what are the 3 most widely recognized IT governance frameworks? We had several that were mentioned within the context, but I do want to talk about the 3 that we should be familiar with already because we talked about them back in AIS. Joe, what does your group say?
We did ITIL, which is IT Infrastructure Library, COBIT, which is Control Objectives for Information and Related Technology, and ISO 2702.
Right. Okay. And we're going to talk a little bit more about those in just a second, about what the difference with those are, how they represent. So yeah, but those are the 3 that we're going to be talking about. There are a few others that were mentioned in the article. There's a Calder Moir, there's ISO IEC 38500. That's actually a relatively new one and one that I need to spend some more time on reviewing because I'm not as familiar with it as I probably should be. But the ones that are kind of considered to be the industry standard, the ones that we're going to focus on for the first part of this course are going to be those 3. COBIT, Control Objectives for Information and Related Technology, which if you use all the letters correctly, it should be COBIRT. I'm not sure why. I make that joke every year and it's never funny. So then we have ITIL, Information Technology Infrastructure Library, and then we have the ISO 27000 series. In the article, they say ISO 27002. We're going to be looking at another example of this next week, which is going to say ISO 27001. I'm just going to kind of make a shortcut and say, anytime you see ISO beginning with 27, you should think ISO 27000 series because they are related. The actual 27001, 27002 refers to a specific standard within the series. Okay, one's implementation, one's guidance. That's basically all we're referring to. You don't need to make the delineation. You just need to know the 27000 series is what's important. All right. According to the CIO Wiki, what are the 5 domains for IT governance? All right. Meg, what does your group say on this one? Good. So strategic alignment, value delivery, performance management, risk management, and resource management. Okay. And you did such a great job with that. I'm going to ask you the 3rd question as well. You're gonna have 2 questions right off the bat, which is probably unfair because I'm not going to do that to anybody else. But what did the other resources? What did they say the 5 domains for IT governance are? They were all the same. Was there any subtle differences? Okay, depending on the resource that you looked at, they were all the same. You're absolutely correct. Okay, depending on the resource you look at, there may have been some reorganization, there may be some just change in order. I don't know whether or not this implies a hierarchy. To be honest, my hierarchy probably would be value delivery would be the first one, and then everything would fall from there. But I think that that's a subtle distinction that's probably not important to make. Okay. So that is correct. All four of those are all five of those are going to be listed. Now, we're not going to go into depth on those because I asked you to define those here in just a little bit, and I want to actually go into the depth of how you define those. But let's go ahead and get into the let's get into conceptual questions. These are the ones that you should have answered as an individual. By the way, this will kind of be the trend is that I will ask you the definitional questions as an individual and then the conceptual questions as a group. Not always, but for the most part, that's kind of how the approach we're going to take. So now let's deal with the conceptual questions. What is the difference between IT governance and corporate governance? Or is there a difference? Okay. Me saying that there's a difference implies that there's a difference. Is there a difference, Tyler?
Yeah, IT governance is just a form of corporate governance, more specifically focused on information technology.
Okay.
And corporate governance is kind of a framework and system that controls the entire company.
It just now occurred to me there's two Tylers in the class. I was looking at the wrong one. My bad. Okay. All right. So yeah, absolutely. One's IT governance actually focus on IT governance or governance over IT, information technology and security, whereas corporate governance is more about the organization as a whole. So would it be fair to say, okay, would it be fair to say that IT governance is a subset of corporate governance? Yeah, corporate governance is about the enterprise operations as a whole. It's going to have a lot of the same considerations with respect to value, with respect to security, with respect to trust, but they're going to be more applied to everything, all the assets, all the resources that are assigned by the organization, whereas IT is focused specifically on information technology. Also, there's another term that we could use for corporate governance. We've never actually used this term before, but you may have encountered this if you actually did a little bit of drilling. Did anybody encounter a synonymous term for corporate governance in their research? So did anybody encounter the term enterprise governance? Yeah, and the only reason I want to bring that up is if you encounter the term enterprise governance, you should think, okay, that's talking about in corporate governance. This is not a separate philosophy. It is basically the same thing. In fact, if you click on the hyperlink for corporate governance in the CIO wiki, it takes you to a page called enterprise governance, or maybe vice versa, one of the two. So enterprise governance and corporate governance are basically the same thing. Okay, so that kind of gets us to that question. I kind of spoiled the question already, but you know what, Austin, I believe that you can provide me with value even though I spoiled the question, okay? So how does IT governance relate to governance areas and other governance areas and organizations? So enterprise governance, product development governance, and development governance.
And then the IT governance services one is product technology aligns with business goals. And then product development is another subset of that, which focuses on product design and delivery and have overlapping values. And then within that is development. It's programs and projects.
Good. All right. So basically this diagram right here, kind of how we consider that. By the way, anybody knows, so I'm scrolling through that there's a 30-day muscle gain plan. What are they trying to say about me? All right. So, all right. All right. So, yeah, I hate ads embedded in these. I actually really like the CIO wiki stuff, but the ads can get really, really obnoxious very, very quickly. This is not even the worst ad. There was one for Russian brides that came up, which I promise you, I have never pursued Russian brides in my life. It was really embarrassing during that one class session. I was scrolling past that quickly. I was like, okay, yeah. I was like, I don't know what they're trying to say about me. But anyway, so enterprise governance, holistic, deals with the organization as a whole, okay? IT governance is a subset of that. We can actually see that within the whole, and actually it's constrained within the enterprise governance. There's not like a Venn diagram. It is part of the overall. Now there's kind of a Venn overlap. We talked about product development governance. What really confused me, and this is not something that I'm concerned with for this course, or it's not going to be on the quiz, but just kind of an interesting one is why is development governance within that? You would think that development governance would be a broader concern. It would be something that's broader than both IT governance and product development governance. In fact, it actually says development in product development governance. So why is it not broader? I think Austin actually made a good definition, says kind of management operations. Okay, so it may be just constrained to only management activities. But I've never really been able to come up with a satisfactory answer with that. It still eludes me a little bit. But for the most part, our ultimate consideration, the thing that we're ultimately concerned about, is listed here. How does IT governance fit within enterprise governance? The answer is that it is enterprise governance specifically for IT assets. That's basically all there is to it. Okay. I've just wasted 36 minutes of your life talking about that particular definition. Okay. Which that definition is really, really important. We need to think, understand it, but we can get to a little bit more detail. All right. So moving on, question number 7. Question number 7, with respect to question 2, what are the differences between the IT governance frameworks? Okay. So, Ben, I'm going to start you out with the IT governance frameworks. Okay, so we had 3 IT governance frameworks, and we didn't really define those. So it's up to you. The task is up to you, and this is an important task. So you feel you're up to it? All right. So tell me a little bit of distinction between the 3 IT governance frameworks.
So the ITIL framework, development, execution, and maintenance of an IT service.
Okay.
And the COVID framework is focused on businesses operations as a whole.
Mhm.
And it emphasizes using IT to mitigate risk in the organizational world. So, 7.2 focuses on information security management, providing a comprehensive set of controls for protecting information assets.
That was a great definition, great series of definitions. Let's go ahead and drill down a little bit on that to make sure that we can consolidate that into concise and precise definitions. Okay. So first of all, if I were to say which one of these 3 most closely relates to IT governance as a whole, which one of the 3 control frameworks would you say deals with IT governance as a whole? Now, all 3 can relate to IT governance, but I'm talking about the broad objective of IT governance. Which one of the 3 do you think it is? If you don't know, you got a 33% chance guess. Okay. COVID. It is COVID. Okay. COVID is extremely broad. It deals with IT governance as a whole. It's interesting because COVID is very much like another framework that you and I have discussed before. We talked about this, like, okay, how do you know we've talked about this, Dr. I said, no, because I've had you for 2 classes and we talked about it in both of those 2 classes. What was that framework that we talked about both in AIS and auditing that I'm so fascinated with? COSO, Committee on Sponsoring Organizations, which we've not abandoned COSO, by the way. We'll see it again. But COVID is very similar in that regard. It is very, very broad. Okay, COSO dealt with controls in general. COSO deals with IT governance. For COVID, it deals with IT governance. It's interesting when we talk about a broad approach, it doesn't really give us any specific guidance on how to approach a problem. It just says, here's what you need to address. Here's the problem you need to fix. Here's the issue you need to be aware of. What actually provides the how to address those problems? That's going to be ITIL and the ISO 27000 series. Now, ITIL deals with information technology service, okay, service delivery. In other words, how can we maximize value using our IT assets? So ITIL kind of takes the value approach, which you're probably seeing where we're going to go with this one. ISO 27000 series deals with something called an information security management system, an ISMS. It is more about how do we mitigate risk in information security technology assets. So that's kind of nice and precise, don't you think? We've got COBIT, which actually deals with IT governance as a whole, very, very broad level perspective. And then our 2 probably most important concepts that we talked about were value delivery and risk management. And we've got 2 frameworks, one each that deals with that. ITIL deals with kind of IT service delivery, which is that value proposition. And then ISO 27000 series said, we'll deal with the risk. We'll deal with the security. So I want you to keep that in mind because we're going to be exploring these not just next week, but throughout the semester. We're going to explore them in depth next week, but we're going to talk about them a little bit more over the course of the semester and how they relate to IT governance as a whole. All right. Use the information for the above resources to prepare your own definition for each of the 5 domains in IT governance. Okay. So what coincidence? We got 5 groups and I got 5 definitions, so I can just dash through these. All right. Joe, let's start with you. Let's go with strategic alignment. What is strategic alignment? How'd your group define strategic alignment?
We said strategic alignment helps IT align current business operations with the enterprise strategy that has been developed.
Good. Okay. So whatever the plan is, whatever the strategy is for the organization, I want to make sure that we can utilize our IT resources and the best aligns with that. It's really, really hard to actually define something not using the word strategy and alignment when I'm using strategic alignment. But the idea being is that we want to use our IT resources in the best way to accomplish our organizational goals. Okay. Is that related to the next concept of value delivery? Yeah. So how do we define value delivery, Meg? Good. Yeah, so pursuing items that are going to be value beneficial and making sure that we don't have benefits or we don't have costs that outweigh the benefits. Okay. I was going to share a little anecdote. I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to do the YouTube videos I was going to do. But there's one that's talking about value delivery, and the discussion is a gentleman who's talking about how a small city with an employee staff of about 150 people, very a town kind of the same size as Kirksville. They were looking for a re-engineering of their payroll system. Now, how many people think that they could do a payroll system for the city of Kirksville at least somewhat reasonably well using Excel spreadsheet? If I told you 150 people, I feel pretty confident 150 people, I can manage that pretty easily. Okay. So what did they do? Did they implement an Excel spreadsheet? No. Somebody who was responsible for it, he had a background in IBM. And back in the 1980s and 1990s, IBM was not doing very heavy work on networking or personal computers. They were in the process, or they were kind of the drivers behind mainframe computing. Has anybody ever seen a mainframe computer? It's a massive piece of machinery. Okay, it's a massive piece of machinery. It's basically does very powerful mechanisms, but it's very clunky. It's very expensive, very power oriented. So this thing cost $1 million at the time, which $1 million doesn't sound like much, but we're talking about a small city, which has 150 people. Is there was a need for having a payroll system in a mainframe computer for any organization of that size? I would argue not. Okay, I would argue that that was not a value maximizing proposition. That was something where the cost very definitely exceeded the benefit. All right, next one, risk management. Tyler. Are we talking about like a robot apocalypse that we're talking about there? Yeah, possibly. Yeah. Okay. Trying to make sure the risks that are associated with the use of IT and what security issues we need to be aware of. Yeah. So good. Austin, resource management. Good. So basically, the best utilization of these IT resources that we have with the organization. We may have some resources that would be better served in other areas of the organization that would be utilized. If we had like $1 million mainframe using it for payroll, that seems like a waste. But if we could utilize it in some other capacity, then maybe that would be a optimization of the resource usage. And then performance measurement, Ben. Good. All right. So, yeah, basically trying to say that we're trying to make sure that we monitor and update as necessary, and we utilize our resources effectively, and we can continue to do that for the foreseeable future. That sounds a lot like something that we talked about in COSO. What was that? What was that thing in COSO that sounds a lot like that? Sounds like monitoring to me, doesn't it? Okay. Remember, monitoring says the risks change over time, so we need to update our assumptions and update our procedures as necessary. Performance measurement kind of seems like the same idea. Okay. Interesting alignment. I guess everything is just a variant of COSO. That's actually more true than you might believe, but we'll find out about that over the course of the semester. Okay. How do these domains relate to one another within an IT framework? And I wanted you to use the service end piece. So let's see if we can jump over there. All right, so did everybody kind of identify this one right here? This is the item right here. So in other words, the way that it's defined in this piece, and I'm not going to argue that this is correct. Okay, this should not necessarily be your sole interpretation. I think this is an interpretation. So the idea being is that this is kind of a cyclical process. Okay, and you may even argue with the word cyclical because cyclical should be a circle and this is a square. But it's a sequential process of utilization. We actually determine what our strategy is. We optimize our value delivery, we adjust for risks, and then we measure performance. And you'll notice IT resource management is kind of external to that because IT resource management is going to happen at every phase of this particular process. That's basically what this is telling us. Now, if I were to give this piece to you and say, okay, is this represent these five components effectively? What do y'all think? Could this definitely be improved upon? Yes, this could be a hyperdimensional representation. If we had a three-dimensional representation, it'd probably be more appropriate because then we could align everything together and kind of see the pieces that align. But for a simplification of a fairly difficult and tedious concept, I think this is a good approach. Okay, I think this is a good strategy to approach this. Now, The good news is I'm not going to ask you too much about these 5 components and how they relate to one another, but I do think that you have a need to have an understanding of basic sequential operations here. All right, last question. In your own words, why is IT governance important? Okay, so I've already called upon the people, but Joe, I'm going to call upon you a third time. Okay, and you're the voice of the class right here. So in your own words, and by the way, I may call on somebody else just so, but but you are going to be the primary voice here. Okay, so it's a lot of responsibility. You're up to it.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Okay. What was your group's response to this one?
We said IT governance is important to ensure management's goals are being met while accounting for the risk that may be encountered, which allows all of management's processes to be integrated together in order to align organizations' goals with different processes. They are completely simultaneously.
Good, and that definition that you gave me was very, very effective in the fact that it encompassed our 2 primary considerations that we talked about. We started with this lecture with, which is going to be value, which is generally going to be one of the big management strategies in an organization, with optimizing for risk. Okay. By the way, I've used that term risk optimized value. Is everybody familiar with this idea of risk optimized value? It's kind of a given, but when you talk about risk optimized value, all we're talking about is we're trying to actually maximize value subject to constraint of risk. Okay. If you think that one project has more value than the other, you have to determine, okay, is there more risk associated with that project? If so, we probably don't want to take on that project. If not, why are we not going with a higher value project? Okay. A risk optimized value is one of those things that we're not going to really calculate, but I do think that at a very basic level, everybody should have an understanding of that already. Okay. So value subject to the constraint of risk. And yeah, that's obviously there. Now, if I would expand upon that definition, the only one thing that I would add in there is I would add some element of trust so that we need to encompass, because that was also one of the consideration of the terms. But I think that's subsidiary to the other 2 considerations. So overall, very good, robust definition. All right. Everybody feel more knowledgeable about IT governance, ready to storm out in the world and become IT governors yourself? Okay, we got more to come, so I'll let you go for this week, and we'll come back on Monday for more. Have a good weekend.